Welcome back to More Than a Lumpy Jumper. After last week's bonanza of reconnecting with friends for Armed Forces Week, we're continuing feeding our souls with a chat with the fabulous Reverend Alison Riley, who is a dear friend and another of our Sandhurst cohort. We're talking about spirituality and leadership, how having some form of compass helps in developing resilience, and we jointly find a new favourite person, Richard Raw. Come and have a listen to Being a Person for a Bigger Purpose. Welcome back to More Than a Lumpy Jumper. We are so happy to have a wonderful friend of ours, Alison Riley, who was at Sandhurst with us, and she has agreed kindly to come and join the mayhem and discuss lots of things, but with an overarching title of spirituality and how that is incorporated into leadership.
Well, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And it's extraordinary, isn't it? How was it 30 years ago we were at Sandhurst together? Is it that
more?
I became a maths teacher, so I can't really do counting as such very well. But it's amazing the bonds that you make during a time like that and afterwards, and how you meet as friends 30 odd years later and who you are again. And it's just almost the same, really, isn't it?
We absolutely love that. I mean, I think that Bridge and I, having done this for a little while now, but it's like nothing has changed. Loads and loads has changed, but nothing has changed. It's like we've just literally just pressed record, haven't we? I keep calling you Dunney. That's not going to be very helpful on this recording. I must get used to saying Alison, like you're a grown up now or something. But I've actually spoken to you for that long, and yet I know you just managed to start ripping into me as we started pressing record straight away, which was amazing. I love it. It's like nothing has changed.
Yeah. Well, there we go.
And so one of the reasons that we've invited you, Alison, apart from the fact that we are dying to talk to you and really looking forward to it, but, you know, why you, for this episode on spirituality, is that you have had, we've all actually really interestingly, when we talked to any of our cohort that we were at Sandhurst with, have all had really interesting, different journeys since we joined the army, and for most of us left the army. So would you share with us just a little bit about, you know, what happened when you left the army?
Well, the day I left the army was the first day that Tony Blair took office as Prime Minister. And so it was the 1st of May, 1997. And I remember it well because I was in a place called Glenafric, right up in the Highlands of Scotland there, staying over in a youth hostel with a friend. And it was kind of like Liberation Day, which I guess is what everyone feels when they leave the military. And I was really happy to leave a whole load of stuff behind me. And yet, as I reflect over the years, I have to say that sort of formational experience, both at Sandhurst and after, for better and for worse, has formed me into the person I am today, really. So I left the army and I trained to be a secondary teacher. I taught secondary maths for about 10, 15 years after that. And I think what I really loved about leaving the army was that I could choose when I wanted to move. And so I moved around quite a lot, but I moved when I wanted to move. So I lived in Lancashire for a while, and then I went and lived in the northwest of Scotland. I lived down in Wiltshire. I lived up in Edinburgh. And eventually I met a guy and we got married and I settled in Cumbria, and I've been here since 2002.
And I didn't, were you mathy? Was that a word? I don't know. Were you mathy before you joined the army?
Mathy, what does that mean? No, I'm not sure.
Mathy, you know, did you do maths at uni, or were you?
Maths. Oh, yeah. No, I studied maths because you didn't have to write essays, and I was never very good at writing essays, and it was just numbers. And I was quite good with numbers. Now I'm just lazy about numbers. So yeah, I trained to be a maths teacher because I had a maths degree before I joined the army. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. And then what did you do once you left teaching?
Oh, okay. So I left teaching. I left teaching actually because all the past stuff of my life gradually caught up with me after about 10 years of leaving the army. And I left teaching actually with no job to go to at all. And I thought, well, I'll be fine now because all the stresses of my life will be gone. But actually they really weren't. And so the first thing I did when I left teaching was I had to sort myself out. I went and saw a doctor and said, I think I have bipolar disorder. And they said, why is that? And I said, well, because some days I feel like I'm on top of the world and other days I feel like I don't want to live anymore. And I'm not sure that's what bipolar disorder really is, but my experience of life was yo-yoing, sometimes several times within 1 week, sometimes several times within a day, from like feeling like life was great to life was awful, and sometimes with periods of prolonged low mood that you probably call depression, certainly with a whole load of anxiety in there. So when I first left teaching, I thought, do you know, life is just going to be great now because I haven't got the stresses of a job. But actually what happened was all the stuff that I'd stuffed under the carpet for at least the past 10 years from the army and before that, it's sort of like it couldn't be stuffed under the carpet anymore because A, because there was no room, and B, because there was nothing else really to think about. So no distractions. So that's what I did. I sort of got myself sorted out, basically. Yeah.
And then where did that lead you?
Where did that lead me? So somewhere mixed up in that. In my last year of teaching, it led me basically on a journey of faith and towards a renewed commitment to Christianity. And a few years after that renewed journey of faith and towards Christianity, I basically, probably because I was telling the vicar what I thought he ought to do, he said, well, I think you ought to become a vicar. I was really looking at his job thinking, I think I could do that, you know. And I think the military gives us something of that, doesn't it? We look at what other people are doing and we go, I think I could do that too. So then he said, well, go and you do it. So then it wasn't quite as simple as that, but it wasn't far off. So I trained to be a vicar, and now I trained to be a minister in the Church of England. So I wear one of those collars, you know, that people wear if they're a minister or a priest or a vicar in the Church of England, lots of different words for it. But really, I'm not a sort of usual or how you might expect a vicar to be, because I work primarily with 11 to 18s, which probably came out of working with young people in schools. Although I am in church on Sundays looking like a vicar. I don't do what most vicars do during the week. I don't do too many funerals or weddings or baptisms, but I do a lot of doing church with young people on a Friday night, having dinner together and getting good connection together, both with each other and with God. So that's kind of how I ended up eventually. That's what I'm doing now.
Alison, can I just track back, if I may? I don't want to leave you in the hole that you found yourself in, or dragging all of the bits out from under the carpet. But
oh yeah,
I just wonder if there are key things as you were getting all of that stuff out and clearly dealing with it, that there are things that you learnt whilst you were there that are part and parcel of how you live today.
Yeah, I think one of the pluses of army training and army experience is it almost like gave us an override switch, I think, an ability to keep going when actually everything within us says you really should stop now for the sake of your health. And I think that can be a tremendous plus. All right, I think that can mean that we can push through situations. We're really good in a crisis, and we can help people to get through stuff when other people will give up. But what that means is that if we have like a front stage and a backstage, if you like, we can keep the front stage going because that's what the training teaches us to do. But quite often then the backstage, it needs some attention or we fall apart. And I think what had happened is I'd done so much front stage stuff that the backstage stuff began to fall apart. And so that was the stuff under the carpet. And what did I learn during those times? Well, I think I had to learn that it's okay to be a human and not to be achieving. I was always one of those people that wanted to achieve and achieve and achieve. And I got a lot of affirmation from achieving. And I think I had to learn at that point that we can't always be achievers, and we need to learn to feel okay about ourselves even when we're not achieving. So there was one thing that I took from it. The other things I took from it were actually the connections that I got with people. And this is kind of mixed up with faith. So as I found myself alongside other Christians, I began to be able to talk about the things that were deeper in my heart than perhaps I talked about every day. And I'd say to them things like, oh, when you don't want to keep going anymore, when you want to end it all. And they go, no, I don't know that. I say, oh, really? I thought everyone thought that. And they say things like, those things that you can never talk about, that when they come up, you push them away right away. And they go, no, I don't know about things like that. And I say, oh, come on, everyone has those. And they say, no, we really don't have those. And I suppose I learned at that point that perhaps, it sounds really daft, but perhaps everyone's life experience was different, and that perhaps mine wasn't something that I needed just to accept, but was something that I needed to do something about. So I learned that I wasn't alone in those experiences, but I learned they weren't everybody's experiences. And I learned the first one of them is probably the depression due to kind of stress and anxiety. But I learned that the second one was probably due to, whether you want to call it post-traumatic stress or repressed memories or a combination of both. I learned that actually there is healing for those things, both in faith and in getting better mental health. So I think maybe they're the things I learned most in those really difficult kind of times. Yeah.
I can't even begin to tell you how many things that I've just gone, love, 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 as you've actually been speaking about all of that. So much juicy stuff in there. But I think the one that I would want to pick up on just for now is that whole business about having and Bridge might have something to say about this as well, but it's that having those questions where, or those things that you're saying, like, oh, well, what you were saying, that people say, oh, no, I never think like that, or that's never happened to me. I think the brilliant thing about when you can almost bring your backstage front stage, which is basically what you do with questions like that, is that some people go, no, I've never asked questions like that. Two options to that is the fact that they've never had the opportunity or need or purpose to go deep enough, or they really don't think like that, or you have just opened up a space for it to be okay for people to answer in the same way that you have. And I think that somehow that may well correlate with what you are bringing for youth, which is where you're actually working. And I'm just trying to capture that all in, but it's like it makes perfect sense to me how you've ended up with what you're actually doing when you patch all of those things together, and it's just gorgeous. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think one of the things it does is it's like awakening, isn't it? Really, that would be a good expression for it. It's by articulating our experiences, we awaken in others the possibility that actually life isn't all easy. And for most of us at some point in life isn't easy. But sometimes it does seem like for some life is easy, and perhaps it is, and that's good. But letting them know that actually, many of us have these difficult experiences and we journey through them, and letting others know that it's okay to start articulating them. I think that's really important too.
Agreed.
And that is where I end up with the youngsters who perhaps aged about 11 to 25, they're so much more open about talking about mental health and talking about being well. And somehow a lot of the shame of that has gone. They see it much more as an opportunity to engage in healing rather than something that shouldn't be talked about. And I think that's really healthy. And I've gained a lot from talking to the youngsters with that frame of reference rather than with the sort of like 1990s frame of reference that goes, hey, get over yourself. Life's a party, really get on with it. They're two very different ways of looking at things, aren't they? They both have their place.
Very Gen X approach, isn't it? Unfortunately, we are all part of. Bobby and I recently recorded an episode on resilience, and one of the interesting elements of or components of resilience from a lot of the research that we looked at that we didn't really go into very much in that episode was they identified that actually having some element of spirituality, some element of belief was actually helpful or a part of or necessary for resilience. And in actual fact, Bobby, you had referenced, and I don't think it was in that episode, in another episode that we recorded, is it Richard Rohr, who's the Franciscan priest?
Yes.
And when I've been doing the editing and downloading things, I actually had a look at it and it was extraordinary. And so a lot of what you've been talking about is sort of an element of resilience. But for you, Alison, you know, in terms of developing resilience, or your opinion of resilience and sort of the self-awareness that's necessary, how have you, you know, in terms of the places you've been, in terms of the different jobs you've done, what has been helpful and not helpful?
Okay. So I think I thought I was a pretty resilient person. Okay. But then it turned out that really in big generic terms, I really wasn't. I was good at pushing on through, but then not dealing with the stuff. And I think to develop good resilience, we have to deal with the stuff, and that requires self-awareness, definitely. And I think faith plays a part, or spiritual reflection, or whatever you want to call it, because faith gives us a big vision. And sometimes resilience is about keeping going, but keeping the big picture in mind, that grit determination to see it through, because we've got a vision of what we want to see at the end of this, or we know what we're journeying towards. So all faiths can play a part in that, because all worldviews, I guess, give us a vision or a picture. But I think the Christian faith in particular, for me, because it's the one I know most about, that I think it helps develop resilience, because it is, as Richard Rohr would describe it, I think, although I might be misquoting him, he certainly writes a lot about it. It's a healing journey. And salvation, which is one of the big words in the Christian faith, it means healing. It means wholeness. So it's a journey towards healing and wholeness, and especially a journey towards healing and wholeness of the mind. In fact, it's about a transformation of the mind. And what do I mean by that? Well, we kind of all have a way of looking at the world, and we all have kind of a framework of reference of how we see stuff. And the Christian faith has a way of looking at the world and how we see stuff. And sometimes we find that our way of looking at the world is not the same as the Christian way of looking at the world. And I don't mean that in a sort of controlling or telling us what to do type way. I mean it in things like, my frame of reference might be and was, I'm loved when I'm achieving. Okay, so when I'm achieving, life is good, and I know that I am loved. But the Christian faith tells me that I'm always loved. I'm always loved by God, whether I'm achieving or whether I'm not achieving. And that's one of the things that I really had to learn when I was going through that time of working my way through the depression and all the thoughts and all the various bits and pieces that went with that. I had to learn to be at peace with myself, and to learn that I was always loved, not loved for what I did, and not loved for only when I was achieving. Here's another one for me. I feel secure when I'm in a crowd. So my way of looking at the world is, I'm okay when I'm with people. I find it quite hard to be alone. And the Christian faith says, God says, you're never alone. I'm always with you. And it's okay. Don't panic when you're not included in a group, or when you challenge a group and actually they don't want you to be part of it anymore. And that's a journey of healing, which increases our resilience, because it enables us to not worry all the time about pleasing other people. So gradually, my way of seeing the world, which I always thought was great, obviously, but turned out not to be so great, is transformed and changed and shaped by what the Christian faith teaches about how I'm to see the world. So I'm to see myself as always loved, not just loved when I'm achieving. And I'm to see myself as always secure, not just secure when I'm with other people. And I guess it's an ongoing journey like that, really, is how I would describe a faith journey that increases our resilience. So maybe for me, that's why Christian faith increases my resilience. It increases my capacity to engage well with the world through transforming me out of some of the bad habits of my mind. Does that make any sense?
It really does. You know, mine hasn't been a faith journey as such, but it has been very much of a developmental journey since I started coaching. And those things that those things that you say about, you know, my way of looking at the world or the way I was in the world wasn't so right. I often try to not talk about right or wrong, because there's this thing a bit like you're saying about being an achiever. It served you well for a while, but it's like when something becomes an overplayed strength, or however we want to describe it, the way that we're living does not serve us as well as it could, and so then there's something else, and so you've gone for the something else. And Bridget will have heard I often talk to myself as a utter work in progress. You know, every day is a learning day, because often when I'm coaching, people are always doing something outside, because it's so bloody scary to be dealing with all the crap you've got going on the inside.
Yeah, I think as a very, very lapsed Catholic, I have to say I often am a little jealous of people who have a faith, because, you know, it creates a box. It creates something, a vision, or, as you say, a purpose or a reason. And it kind of creates a way of making sense of the world. And, you know, because I've lived and worked in places where there are different faiths, and watching people who have a deep faith is very humbling for me. So yes, I think when I was listening to Richard Raw talking about some of the elements and effectively this idea that it creates a framework, because otherwise everything is a bit chaotic if you don't have some form of framework. But I love what you said about that you feeling loved even when you aren't achieving, because I think, Bobby, you've talked a lot about that as a struggle of your own, and I think I recognise that in me too. I strongly suspect that actually many women in the military, and men too, but particularly the women who choose to join the military, I suspect that is an issue for many of them. This idea that we are high achievers, and that our identity is related to where we fit in the world, relates to our achievements, rather than when we're not achieving, where we kind of then feel.
I think it's Wendy Palmer who says to learn to do things without requiring any form of applause.
Yeah. And that would reflect beautifully with the Christian faith as well, that says, you know, I do these things for an audience of one, and it's God, my Heavenly Father, which is really beautiful. And yet, when I look at how I act, the two are not quite the same. And I know that as a human, I really need affirmation of others as well to feel well enough. It's better if it's just not the main thing, because, like you say, Bobby, sometimes, you know, what goes on the inside of us is such a mess that we just need a few things to hang on to. And as we explore them and work them out, we find that we can be set free from them. And I think Richard Raw talks quite a lot about that liberation journey as well, which is all good stuff. Yeah. Well, the other one is I am good enough. That's a really important one, isn't it? You know, I don't have to be perfect. I'm already good enough, but I can aspire to more, which is such a different way round, isn't it? Than, no, I have to be the best, and I have to be perfect, and I have to be this. And I think the military does encourage, you know, not be the best that you can be, but be the best, and nothing else will do. So untangling some of those messages that we aspired to through military training, and recognizing them, that there's good in them, but that they're not ends in themselves, I think is really helpful. And we do that one way or another with a different frame of reference. And for me, it's Christian faith that forms that frame of reference, I think. That's how it works. Sometimes Alison, I'm not quite sure.
Alison, one of the big parts of your ministry is working with youth. And Bobby and I have had chats about some of the differences and the challenges that the different generations have experienced and are experiencing, and how often there's a gap in understanding. You know, often, you know, you only have to go onto social media or listen to the press where people are complaining about the work ethic of the young and et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, to be honest, I try to play it down a little bit, because I'm pretty sure that, you know, the generations above us when we were young were also saying similar things about our work ethic. But I do think it's become very pointed now about Generation Z, and you've already said that you think that generally they're much more able to be open about mental health, for example. But I don't know whether that necessarily then translates into resilience. And I wonder what you thought about that.
Yeah, I think I don't know that necessarily it does. And I think encouraging our younger generations to develop resilience is really important, because I think it's hard. It's hard for all of us, but it's particularly hard for the young. I think the turning point came for me, that the real motivation to work with young people was about 10 years ago now. I went to one of these big Christian festivals in the summer. There are usually about 2,000, 3,000 people there. And they have these big worship tents, and everyone goes along, and it's kind of like a rock concert, but it's worship music. So, and there were a whole load of young people on the dance floor. So that us older people had chairs to like help our legs and stuff like that. And the young people just had this freeform dance floor space. Okay. So you could tell where the youngsters were, and you could tell where the adults were. Every now and again, there was a little foray from the older people to go and dance with the young people, and then go and sit down for a bit. So it was a bit like that. But then the speaker asked these young people, he said, I know some of you, and it was so pointed. He said, I know some of you here. He said, I think maybe God says some of you here are thinking of taking your own lives. You've got your big smile on your face, but you want to end it. If that's you tonight, if you have the courage to, and if you're in a group of friends and you feel secure enough to, would you just stand? And across this huge tent, like of about maybe 1,000 young people sat on the floor at the front, these youngsters, they began to stand. And I saw these beautiful young people who looked like they had all their lives sorted out, who were surrounded by groups of friends, who were beautifully presented. And they began to stand up. And I thought, God, what is this? And I think something in me broke at that point, that I knew that I'd had some difficult experiences as an adult. Okay. So I knew that in my 20s and all that, I did have those sorts of feelings about, do I really want to live anymore, and all that sort of stuff. But I hadn't experienced it as a teenager. And I thought, God, this shouldn't be. Why have we got, and I'm sure it was always true that people always felt this, but I felt it at that point. Why are these, what can I do for these young people? Let me be part of the solution, God, not part of the problem. I think that's what it really came down to, was I want to be part of helping these young people to see the world differently, if they can. I want to be part of helping them to experience love, joy, and peace and fulfillment, life in all its fullness. And that's kind of where the journey in church with young people started, because then we formed a youth church of 11 to 18s, and we meet for dinner on a Friday night. And for some of them, it's all about dinner. That's okay. We made a cracking toad in the hole last week, and I know some of them had other things to go to, and they just wanted to get their seconds in before they left. And that was okay. That's fine. But a lot of them stay and do church with us for an hour, and we call it chill church, and it's very chilled. And it's church in a way that maybe 11 to 18s can engage with relatively easily. So there's lots of space to talk. There's lots of discussion about what to pray for. There's a chance to worship to music if you want to do that. And I really hope that as we do that, we curate a space together where we can connect with each other and we can connect with God. And why do I want to do that? Because for those, especially those who are really struggling on the inside, I'd like it to be a safe space where they can begin to articulate that, or there are safe adults there with whom they can begin to articulate it, in the hope that it doesn't just stay something on the inside, but that as it's shared on the outside, it loses some of its intensity, and maybe they can begin or continue that journey towards healing. Because I think our 11 to 18s, their mental health is awful, even in comparison with our generation. And what I see in terms of anxiety and stress and depression among the young, it's really quite alarming and quite frightening. And I think, that's why I work with them. They give an awful lot as well, but I don't feel necessarily disconnected from them. I think they're really, really good at giving us an outside image of almost perfection, really. And yet on the inside, like their backstage is often just either non-existent or falling apart. So yes, I think we need to help them develop resilience, among other things.
I don't fully appreciate or understand the science, but I remember a while back now, I mean, my youngest is now mid-20s, but I'm ever mindful that when you think about a younger person's brain, hers still isn't fully formed, because I think they say that's 25. But I remember there being people in her school talking to parents about how to work with teenagers. Maybe start by how you live with them, but then everything else besides. But showing what their brain looks like, which is like an ordnance survey map with every single track, lane, and everything, and then about how the synapses work to try to create motorways and better connections. And so that whole piece about looking at the inside and supporting what those things are that are making those better connections are so important. And the more, for some it will be through spirituality, faith, through others that there'll be something, but it's finding the healthy roots to help them make those connections, because there's no way that they can make any sense of their mental health, because there's everything pinging off constantly in their brain, which is then having an effect on the body as a whole. Because my work is very much in the body angle rather than necessarily the brain, but all, of course, is completely connected. But those that chance for conversation, music, good food, giving them things to focus on from a prayer perspective. All of those are things that are going to enable those connections to be made.
Definitely. I love that, finding healthy roots. That's as in finding healthy ways through. I think that's really, really important. And I think one of the things that really surprised me recently was I work with air cadets as well. So I haven't quite lost all military connections, but the air cadets that I work with, they look like they're from reasonably stable home backgrounds, although you never really know. They're fairly well dressed. They're not that it doesn't look like they're not managing, put it that way. They look fairly well adjusted. Okay. And I thought, I tell you what I'll do. I'll take a loneliness questionnaire down and I'll ask them to do it. And then we'll reflect on whether maybe people from more difficult social backgrounds, maybe they find it harder not to be so lonely, or maybe they don't. And, we'll start looking at that and whether maybe they're quite privileged in where they're coming from. And I know there are always outliers in that, don't get me wrong. But as a core group, I thought that's probably where we're at. I thought, I tell you what I'll do. I'll do the survey myself before I go. And then I'll be able to see, because I'll be a bit more lonely than them because my job's a bit more isolated. I'm not so connected to social groups as they are. I'll expect that. So I did it. And I think I came out a bit lonely or something. And I thought, yeah, that seems about right. Right, let's see how this lot do. To my surprise and horror, really, they came out on the whole averaging pretty lonely. And I was like, ooh, that's not what I expected, even having worked alongside young people for quite a long time. And it was answers to questions like, I feel lonely in a crowd. Although I'm around people, I don't feel connected to them. I feel on my own, even though I'm talking with people. And I think one of the biggest struggles for our Gen A coming out not so far away from lockdown and so on and so forth is their ability to connect really well with others. And they need some help to do that, I think. Not all of them, but many of them do. They need some help to have meaningful conversation, to have meaningful time together, because it's not a kind of default setting anymore. You can spend your whole life online almost connecting, but not quite. And I'm not against online connecting. I'm really not. But they don't seem to have the natural spaces anymore for meaningful connection, human to human, being with other humans. And they're incredibly lonely. And that really shocked me. I don't know if that's something you've experienced among the young or heard anecdotally. I don't know.
Well, it's bizarre. We've just recently done a recording about loneliness, and we were correlating it with the loneliness of leadership, and leaders tending to shut themselves away a bit because they're meant to have their act together, etc., etc. But I was just like that. But we found from the research that we did that the loneliest demographic was 16 to 24.
Yeah.
It wasn't the elderly. It was 16 to 24 for exactly the things that you're saying. But it's interesting because I was talking to my daughter about it yesterday, and we talked about feeling lonely in a crowd, but we also talked about the distinction of solitude. And when we go back to resilience, and I'd be interesting to hear your thoughts, Alison, on solitude, because that's sometimes where I would imagine that the level of prayer comes in, although you pray in community, but that level of solitude, but the distinction of that and how healthy having alone time is. But I think, again, for our youth, it's them understanding the difference.
Or having even an awareness that there is a difference. Yeah, I think so. I noticed, particularly among the 11 to 13s who in lockdown we're looking 4 years ago. So even I can do that one. They were 7, weren't they? The youngest of them. They're now 11. I just noticed such a change in their willingness to connect with each other more than anything. They're quite keen, quite a lot of the time, to connect to adults, but not necessarily to each other. So I think you're right, Bobby. I think connecting in community in prayer is really important, or connecting in community, but from a faith perspective in prayer. And what that does for us with the youngsters is it enables us to be together in a way that encourages them to be able to do it on their own and encourages the rest of us too. So what you learn in community, you can then practice yourself. And both practices, I think, are really important, especially for those of us who feed off being extrovert. We need to learn to be alone well, but we can learn that in community. So providing those spaces for community, for shared silence, for example, it can be really powerful. I'm not quite sure how all that works, but the Quakers kind of get it, because they used to sit in silence together, and still do, until they quake, don't they? That's where the word comes from, until they feel that they are in the presence of God and so immersed in that presence of God that they begin to quake. So we've always understood that silence is good for us. Whether we articulate that as prayer, that's kind of different from different backgrounds and how we want to express it. But I think what we can teach the youngsters together and teach ourselves together is also very important for us to be able to do alone. The Desert Fathers were good at that. They went into the desert well, I can't remember which century. Oh, well, I probably should know. I probably studied it in ordination training, but they went out into the desert and tried to be alone. But because of what they learned through their aloneness and their escaping from all the trappings of the world, they became people who people went to as wise spiritual leaders to teach them about the ways of the world. So they didn't manage to stay alone very long, but one of those ironies, really. But learning to be alone, learning to pray alone, something that's really important for us. But I think our start point, especially for the young, is in community, rather than reading it from a book or even experiencing it on social media. We do it together, that we may learn to do it ourselves and then encourage others to do it with us. Yeah.
Alison, we've talked about maybe that there's this gap sometimes in understanding between the older generation and younger generations. And I wondered whether you had any insight or advice or learning in terms of things that we can do to do that better. Now, I do want to put you on the spot, so you can tell me off if you want.
It just makes me laugh because I've had to understand and really understand what they mean when they're talking about something being woke, because it's not my expression necessarily. I can use it, but what they, as a younger generation, understand by it is different. But I experience it a little bit. So, for example, sometimes when I write out a discussion sheet or something, they'll cross a bit out and they'll say, "Oh, you can't say that." I say, "Oh, okay, thank you for that." They say, "Yeah, we just put a black mark through it." So thank you, that's lovely. I can't remember what it was, so fortunately. But I think the one that was most striking was we had this chocolate bingo, and we're having one on Friday, so it's probably on my mind. And it's a bit of a fundraiser, and the young people do the bingo calling. It came to two fat ladies, 88, and they said, "Oh, you can't say that." I said, "Oh, why not?" They said, no, you can't say that. That's offensive. I said, "Oh, is it?" Yeah. And they've changed it. They've changed it to two cold snowmen, 88. So there you go. I know. And I thought about that and I thought, oh, for goodness sake. And then you think, no, actually, what are they doing here? And what they're saying is we don't want anyone to feel uncomfortable or excluded by what we might laugh about. And I'm really okay with that. And I think we can learn that from the younger generation. But you can imagine what happened on the bingo night. It came to 88, and half the lot that had come in to play bingo went, "Oh, two fat ladies," and the young people were like, "No, it's not that. No, it's two cold snowmen." Okay, and everyone's like, "Okay, we're okay with that." So I think we can learn that they have learned to be at their best incredibly kind and to be incredibly considerate about other people's fragility, instead of it being, oh, you're really fragile, man up and get over it, or whatever expression we would want to use. Theirs is, I don't want to appear judgmental about you, and I don't want to do anything that upsets you or might upset you in case you're a bit fragile. And I think that's absolutely beautiful. And I think that's something we can really learn from them. I know we can take the mick out of them. I'm still not convinced about the bingo calling for 88. Well, I am actually. I wouldn't want to say it now either, just in case. I don't know what it is exactly, but it's a different way of seeing the world, and it's a different way of treating each other. And I think it's a whole lot kinder and a whole lot nicer. So I think they give us that gift if we're prepared to hear it from them and understand why.
I really love that. And I think that I always, it's one of the things I'm saying to people so often is that language is so important in terms of the atmosphere and the environment that we create. And that, what you're saying, that their kindness is a gift, I think is really beautiful, because so many people will sort of mock and say, oh, it's political correctness gone mad, snowflakes, fragility, all of these things. And actually, then I ask myself, why would anyone want people to be upset or feel excluded or hurt by the language that we use, even if we don't necessarily agree with people's choices of how they live? Actually, the very least we can do is show some empathy, and that kindness, the fact that they're able to source such incredible empathy when actually a lot of the sort of grown-ups and the decision makers and politicians are using language and making decisions that are so lacking in empathy often. I think it's extraordinary, and I do think it's an incredible lesson that we should be learning from the people who are going to be the decision makers of the future, ultimately, and we'll be making decisions when we are, if we're still alive, sort of crumbling away in a corner somewhere. But actually the fact that they can show that empathy even when all of, as you say, what's going on behind them. And maybe it's as a result of that that they are so much more tuned in to how difficult it can be if people don't show you that kindness, that tiny little bit of kindness, by worrying about what you feel when I speak to you.
Absolutely.
I think I'd just like to add, because it is about this gap, I like to use the word blend, because I'm in violent agreement with you. There is absolutely so much to learn from the younger generation because of this way that they actually see the world. And I am after balance. I'm reading a book at the moment called Radical Candor by Kim Scott, and she has this 4-box grid. So radical candor sits on the top right, but when you're not careful, you can move to the left and get into what what she refers to as ruinous empathy. And so we might not like the language in it. There's also manipulative insincerity that she talks about, and obnoxious aggression. We've all come across both of those as well. But
we can all do them as well.
Exactly. I am an obnoxious aggressor frequently. But I aim for radical candor because my intentions are kind. but I won't
yeah,
step away
yeah,
from
yeah,
speaking truth about
yeah,
performance or
yeah,
challenge
yeah,
or whatever it might be.
mm,
And so I mean, it's a really interesting book, and I'm not suggesting
mm,
we are in the territory of
mm,
ruinous empathy, but I think that there's
mhm,
absolutely stuff that we
mm,
have to learn from the younger
mm, mm,
generations, and we
mm,
still have stuff that they can learn. I'm not expecting us to go, actually,
mm.
man up, get over yourself was the right way to go. And yet there are
No,
occasions where you might just have to do that. So again,
absolutely. Yeah.
we're back to there are good things in all of it. It's not that the way that we've done it is all bad.
Mm.
The way that they do it is all good. So that's why I use the word blend to fill that gap. I mean,
I think
there's
that's,
those bits from both of us which would make things so much better.
I think that's really helpful. And I think, what do I think on that? I was thinking that actually, yes, we do need to challenge where they're coming from. Looking at their intent was the beautiful part about it. And their intent was to be kind, and that is beautiful. But the flip side to that, what you described, what was the empathy? It was interesting.
Ruinous empathy.
Ruinous empathy. The flip side to that is that sometimes they confuse expressing an opinion with appearing judgmental. Don't be judgy. And actually, well, there is a case for being able to express your opinion well. And it isn't a form of judgment. It is expressing an opinion and encouraging the youngsters to be able to express different opinions and hear each other in difference. That's really important. I'm not sure we're particularly good at it as adults, but we are a little bit more robust sometimes about being able to speak. What did you call it? Radical candor.
Yeah.
Quite like that. Yeah, yeah. So there's definitely a balance, and the flip side to their empathy, even if their intent is good, is that some of the other bits of living a more robust and resilient life get missed off, particularly their ability to speak without feeling judged or without thinking the other person will feel judged because they express something that is different. It's really important.
I think it's that they bring kindness, and with that kindness they bring wisdom. And where we probably end up is wisdom through experience, and perhaps sometimes forget about kindness. And so it's having the blend of both of those.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's also something in there that's quite difficult for our young people about what is truth, because there are so many conflicting truth claims, big and small. The truth about how to live a fulfilled and successful life is actually something of the value of contesting truth claims gets put to one side. And perhaps experience is my only authenticator of what is true. So it doesn't matter what other people say. My experience is my experience, and that's kind of it. So I don't need to tell you what I think, and you don't need to tell me what you think. We just experience, and that's enough, which I don't think it is, by the way. But I think one of the problems that we have generated perhaps for our younger folks is that there are so many competing and apparently equally shiny truth claims about how to live well in the world and what's true and what isn't.
I think that there's a real difficulty often because of a generation that's been brought up wholly with the internet and all information being not necessarily the same as facts. So just having all information available at their fingertip without any real understanding of critical analysis of what is a fact and what is just a piece of information or is an opinion, and the difference between opinions and facts, and the difference between feelings and facts. I think it's a really difficult issue for many young people in terms of understanding also the difference between having information and having knowledge and wisdom, and that they're all very different. And so, I know some of my younger relatives who will see something on TikTok or whatever, and as far as they're concerned, that is the truth now. And so if then someone tells them, well, actually, that's not been my experience, or that's not something that when I have done that, that's not been what has happened to me, or I know that that's not factual, it becomes as if it's an attack on them, and they feel very, very judged. And so actually the way you explained it, I now understand a little bit better about why their reaction is quite the reaction that they get, that there is this disagreement is judgment, and disagreement is somehow personal as well. And I think that that's something, as Bobby said, you know, in terms of blending some of the things that we need to blend, is to be able to find a way to help younger people to be able to do that sort of critical analysis of all the information. I mean, we didn't have that, all of this information when we were young, and I think actually it made life a lot simpler.
He's confessional, because when we're talking about being an achiever, I was like, I really need to go and do some reading about spiritual leadership before I'm anywhere near Alison. So I did come across this book.
I hope I've reassured you on that
exactly. But I think what's so gorgeous is that so many of the things that we're talking about are things that have come up in other episodes. We are just framing it now around faith. And I was reading a book about, the book's called Spiritually Intelligent Leadership by Yossi Amran. And this conversation that we're having about truth and what is truth is one of the chapters that they do is around truth being openness and egolessness. And I think that the community that you're creating, Alison, allows for both of those, which of course is an entirely different way of looking at truth rather than what's on TikTok, because they're taking their truth to be their own. So even if it's not akin to what anybody else, it can be it can be their truth. And I think that that's a good blend for us as well.
Yeah. Because life would be so much easier, wouldn't it, if your truth was your truth and my truth was my truth, and we could just get on with life without having to synergize any of that. And but to an extent, your experience is your experience and mine is mine, and both are authentic. That is true. But if we try and live like everything everybody claims about anything is true, life just isn't like that, is it? And so one of the things I loved, it was a quote that you put on Facebook a while back, Bobby, about difficult conversations. And I loved that, because if your truth was your truth and my truth was my truth, we wouldn't have to have difficult conversations, but we do, because things need resolving. So it's back to that blend again, isn't it, of allowing other people to be who they want to be and live the authentic lives they feel called to lead, and also to connect well and synergize well with other people. And sometimes that means having difficult conversations and saying yes to some things and no to other things. And I know we're trying to teach the young that, but I think I'm still trying to learn that myself, if I'm really honest.
I think we all are. It's a stepping towards with an intention to learn and understand. You know, so you can still keep hold of your own truth, but trying to just explore what others is as well will bring people closer together.
Yeah. So was there something like in that 6 months at Sandhurst, was there something that was like, this is way off piece, but why are the three of us talking about what is truth, 30 odd years later? Is this a usual conversation among people of Gen X 30 years after the way they saw the world was formed? Or is there something about our military experience that leads us to ask these questions? I've absolutely no idea, but I find it fascinating that we're all exploring these things and talking about it together. I think
it's lovely. I mean, bear in mind we used to dress up as green beans as a fun night out, which is another story. We kind of got towards the end of our session, and it's been fascinating. And I would love to continue because actually, I mean, there is actually so much more to talk about, particularly on this topic of what we can learn and what we can share throughout the generations in order to help people feel able to connect. And this issue of connection is huge too. So just to say thank you so much, Alison. I really appreciate it that you were brave to come and chat to us.
It was just awesome.
It was amazing to find that just so many resonances in the ways in which we're exploring life and experience, and what we've kind of ended up doing in different ways. Quite incredible, really. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Alison. Thanks, Bobby.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening. As always, the resources are all on the More Than a Lumpy Jumper website and the Spotify podcast page. Next week, we're delving into the thorny subject of meetings. So much time is spent on them. Is it always necessary? Are there better ways to connect, share information, make decisions? Come and join the conversation in Being in Meetings. And don't forget to vote for us in the British Podcast Awards.